So we're excited to have you here, and I'm going to go ahead and just let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming. My name's Graham Gordy. I'm originally from Conway. Was born and raised there, and started out as an actor, and then eventually moved into playwriting, and then screenwriting, and television writing, and yeah, just trying to think. I, have been. Was in New York was in LA for a little bit as an actor. Was in New York for about a decade, trying to make a go of it as a playwright and a screenwriter, and then have gradually been during all of that time was trying to get back to Arkansas, and my goal, and I say this often, has been twofold. First, to make a living at screenwriting, and secondarily to do it from Arkansas as much as I possibly can. And so so that's part of what Kim was talking about, along with Gary Newton, our executive producer, and Daniel Campbell, who directed our first film of this production company, Mortuous Potter. We have been using the upstairs for the last, 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, as a production office, and shooting our sort of venture film in Little Rock and North Little Rock, and then a lot of exteriors up in Eureka Springs and in the Boxley Valley, and places like that. So that's been an exciting venture, and probably my first real foray, even as a passenger, into entrepreneurship or a startup. So yeah.
Cool. So can you talk a little bit more about your background in your undergrad, and then how you ended up in New York, like you said, and what you were doing there?
Yeah. I went to UCA as an undergrad. My mom was a history professor there, and I went there for a year and wasn't very focused, and I wanted to be an actor. And so after a year there, I moved out to Los Angeles, and it turned out that they had enough actors out there. They didn't actually need my services. But it was essentially, with my scholarship, I had 5 years to complete it from when I started. And so I basically decided I'm going to go out to LA, and I'm going to spend a year doing this and see how I feel about it and if I want to stay. And it actually was going okay. Like I was getting some commercial work, and then I was having some success in improv and sketch comedy, and became a part of the Groundlings, which is sort of a farm team for Saturday Night Live, where Will Ferrell and a lot of those folks came from. And then and it was there that I started writing sketches, and I loved comedy. I was sort of a comedy nerd growing up, and as an actor, even though I still loved it, I saw that there was sort of a path. And granted, it's not like, a lot of other pursuits that are, it's not like going to med school or anything like that, but I did seem to notice that people who'd spent sort of a decade or so there really struggling and pursuing those things as actors would typically start to make a living at it, sometime in their early 30s. And I was like, I don't want to live here that long. And I looked around at the actors that were around me, and I was like, they are so much more passionate about this than I am. Like, what am I that passionate about? And I think that holds true. I mean, for a lot of the actors that I've met. So I moved back. I actually sort of dedicated myself to my studies. I majored in English and philosophy, and I was starting to apply for graduate schools in philosophy, and one of my philosophy professors called me into his office, and he said, if you can do anything else, you should do it. And he said, academic philosophy is not something that you are suited for, not because your desires and you know the pleasure you get from it is not valid, but because you're not going to get those in the world of academic philosophy. But I'd written 2 one-act plays while I was, during those years. And so I started applying to grad school in playwriting, and I applied to, I'd sort of, done my time on the West Coast, and I applied to 4 schools up, in the Northeast, and I got into a couple of them, and I got into NYU, and I was terrified of New York. I think probably because, I don't know, I think that whole sort of, all the 70s films of New York, like Mean Streets and Taxi Driver and things like that, even though that was before my time, like I'd seen all those movies and I just assumed that that's what New York was like, even though I'd been there. So I was, but having this kind of place that I could go and be a part of a group of people, studying the same thing, I sort of couldn't turn that down. So I moved up there, and I was just interested in writing plays. Like I wanted to write for the stage, but the program, the MFA program at NYU is split, where if you go as a playwright, you take screenwriting. If you go as a screenwriter, you take playwriting. And so I borrowed a boatload of money to be there, and then when I got done, I was like, wow, there are 4 playwrights on the planet who actually make a living at it. Maybe I should pursue some of the screenwriting stuff, and so that was sort of the transition into that.
So 2 questions. So one, what advice would you give to people who are aspiring filmmakers and want to just drop out of school completely and do that?
I mean, I think it depends on what path that you really want to take. There is a lot of validity to graduate programs in film and undergraduate programs in film, because you can become versed in that and you have a sort of safe environment in order to do that. At the same time, there's no information that's not out there. So or that you can't pursue in terms of, I think it really just depends on your personality. I mean, I'm not a director. I'm a writer and a producer insofar as I just want to protect my writing. And so it's slightly different. I mean, I needed that in order to make that transition to New York, and I needed that in order to sort of do nothing but write and study writing for a few years. There are, I guess, much braver individuals who just start making films, and I admire the hell out of that. I'm not really that individual. So I think it just depends. There's just as many people who have had success in both of those ways. So I think it just depends on the personality.
So how have you seen the industry change since you've been in it?
It's changed bigly, to quote our president-elect. It's the last decade has been crazy. I mean, it's been, I guess the biggest thing is that there's 2 things. One, a big part of it has to do with the way we receive entertainment. I mean, the way that we take it in. I think that 10 or 15 years ago, it was very, very common for, most people to go to theaters more and go see movies, and that's still the case, but the box office always depends on how things do on Fridays and Saturdays. And that's the way all their projections work. And so people know, by Friday evening how well the movie's going to do for the life of the film. And if you go to a brick and mortar movie theater on Friday night and you look around at who is there, it's generally 14 to 25-year-olds. And so more and more, the movie industry became entirely marketed towards 14 to 25-year-olds. And then, animated films on Saturdays, but mostly you would see on weekend nights, you see certain genres that just sort of work and are continuously there. And they are action movies, superhero movies now, usually sometimes a comedy, sometimes a usually a horror film, and usually some sort of family film. And then this time of year, you start seeing what is becoming this smaller and smaller group of Oscar movies that start coming out, and those are basically reserved for the last couple of months of the year when these studios want to win a trophy. Because their budgets, like if you look at a pie chart of the budget of Paramount or Warner Brothers or any of those studios, then you see probably 70 to 75% of those budgets are going towards summer and holiday releases. And there's not much left over for, character-driven films. So a lot of that, that's one thing, but the other thing is that the fact that, most of us have 60+ inch televisions in our homes now. And when you think about paying for, a babysitter and paying for this much money for a ticket and this much money for popcorn and whatever, and the fact that you can stream a movie or watch a movie that was out in the theaters a few months ago, or you can watch a television show, 10 or 12 or 13 episodes of something on Netflix for something that you're paying that money anyway, then more and more people are just like, well, we'll put the kids to bed and go home, stay home. And so, there's just been this big shift towards that's why there's been such a big shift towards television, back towards miniseries, which is a thing that, wasn't at all present for a solid 20 years. So it opens up, that opens up opportunities for more character-based projects, yeah.
So how have you adapted your career trajectory based on that?
Well, initially when I first got out of school and I, had $150,000 in student loans, I was like, well, okay, so I need to make a living at this. And at first, we were still in the place of writing features. Like I wanted to write features, and I mostly wanted to write character-based features. But I got an opportunity to work with Mike Myers, who was on Saturday Night Live and did Austin Powers and all that, and sort of being a comedy nerd and having that opportunity in New York and the opportunity to stay in New York, then I took that. But after, when was the recession? Like 2008, I guess, everything hit, and the bottom kind of dropped out of the film and everything. It was coming off the writer's strike, so studios were upset with screenwriters, and then the recession happened and everybody downsized, and all of a sudden, instead of whatever money that they had for development, then they sort of took away from that. That's one area where they saved. So they were basically like, okay, if you want to write a screenplay, that's fine, but you need to write it on spec. There were still a handful of big budget feature writers that they were paying, based on what they pitched or whatever, but for the most part, it really shifted around that time, and since then, I think a lot of people. I mean, I became, starting out wanting to write plays, like moving into, at that same time, the sort of revolution that was happening in terms of television with The Sopranos, with Mad Men, with Breaking Bad, and you were seeing that, and I began to sort of aspire to that, because that's where you could tell stories about human beings, and so that's where I sort of shifted a lot of my emphasis.
So how did you get your break into the industry, if you could pinpoint one thing?
I mean, it's probably like with anyone in any industry, there were 15 breaks along the way, and a subsequent 15 failures, so everything from, I mean, just on a human level, writing something that like a graduate school deemed worthy for me to be there was a break, because it was like, okay, well, maybe I can do this. Or a writing professor, sort of taking me under his wing and saying, hey, keep doing this, like, you're not bad at it. Or, one of my main writing mentors and one of my best friends, who wasn't, I mean, he's 15 years older than me, but is a playwright and a guy that I worked for when I was in graduate school. It's kind people seeing that, continuing to sort of affirm that what you're doing is a valid pursuit, and so there really have been like sort of 15 times along the way that those things have happened, whether it be a graduate school or a network executive or an agent or whatever, reading something and saying, okay, well, and also, like, I mean, I look back at the first plays that I wrote and I'm just like, these are awful. Like, they are absolutely dreadful. And then, it's, I mean, I guess it's the, sorry, what is his name? The guy who wrote Blink and The Tipping Point, and yeah, so I mean, it's the Gladwell thing of like, you put in just thousands of hours at anything, and it's like pretty soon you're inevitably going to get better at it. So, and I didn't really have a backup plan. Like, I didn't have, there were plenty of times where I was broke enough or in debt enough to say, like, if I had, and I'm not recommending this to anyone, obviously, but it's like, I had no other marketable skills. Like, I tried to get other jobs, and I had a BA in English and philosophy and an MFA in playwriting. I mean, in the practical world, that may be the most worthless combination of degrees that's out there. So, and there, I mean, I say that genuinely. Like, there's a lot of people who have sort of praised me for my fortitude, and it's like, I would have quit. I promise. I didn't have anything else. So I don't know. Maybe that is a plan: is to to do one thing and then to have to write your way out of it or something. So.
And why did you move back to Arkansas from New York?
I missed it. I mean, we were having a baby, and that was a big part of it. Was just seeing enough parents pulling a stroller up 90 steps out of the subway. The practical matters of it, but also I really began to miss Arkansas, not just because of that life is sort of simpler and easier here in a lot of ways, but also because, well, a couple of things. I mean, one of my friends that I was in grad school with, I think I was in my second year there, and we did a reading of a play of mine, and he's from Berkeley, and he said, I'm really jealous. He's like, you're from somewhere. He's like, you're from somewhere. And I was like, you're from Berkeley. It's not like there's not a history there to draw from. But he was just saying that, like, being from the South or being from Arkansas, which is something that I constantly drew on, was a part of my work. And I actually had a manager at one point who said, because I was talking about, well, do I need to move to Los Angeles? I don't want to, but am I sunk if I don't, basically? And he said, if I were you, I would stay right where you are. First of all, because this industry is always shaky, and your dollar goes further when you're there. And secondarily, because you have a voice in terms of being from Arkansas and being surrounded by the people that you write about. And I do think, I mean, from my time in Los Angeles, because it's sort of a one industry town, I mean, other than weapons, they make a lot of, they do make a lot of airplanes and weapons there. But otherwise, like, it's pretty much a one industry town, and that's all that all anyone is talking about. And so I think that I risked my voice becoming more homogenized because the industry is so pervasive, and you are, it's easy to get distracted by the fact that, oh, somebody did this and this just sold, or this type of thing is selling right now. And so, like, in some ways I'm sure it's a huge detriment to me, but I don't read the trades. I don't pay attention to much of that stuff. And I think that I would have been much more likely to sort of try to follow trends, and also I would have been I would have probably sacrificed something that makes me unique as a writer there. Not that there aren't plenty of other talented Southern writers, but it's one of those calling cards, I guess. So.
Sure. So on that note, could you talk about your production company that you just started in Arkansas and Antiquities? Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Gary Newton and Daniel Campbell and I came together. Daniel had made a short film. He's an exceptionally talented director, and his first short film was called Antiquities, and he did it like 7 or 8 years ago, I guess. And he approached me about helping him adapt it into a feature. And the short is sort of a kind of a meet cute that takes place in an antique mall. And so we got together, and we were friends, and we started getting together and started talking about, I mean, my questions were, why an antique mall? And he said, well, I'm from Saline County. And I was like, well, that pretty much explains it. But why these characters? Why this story? Why, and so we started talking about, like, what was sustainable, like what kind of story was sustainable for a feature, because the distinction being that, you have to stretch this pursuit, this want of this character over an hour and a half to 2 hours. And we started talking about, like, I lost my dad when I was in my early 20s, and Daniel did as well. We started talking about that, and we started talking about this idea of the things that people leave behind. And, like, there's a Loudon Wainwright song called Sometimes I Forget, and it's just about, after his father has died, him going through his dad's house and being like, why would he leave his wallet behind? Why are his glasses there? His keys are right there. Like, not being able to make the kind of cognitive switch that someone is actually gone. And that very much fit into the antique mall world and the estate sale world, that once somebody is gone, all of their stuff has to go somewhere. And also, after you lose someone and you start to kind of excavate their past or talk to people that knew and loved them, like, you're always finding out things about them that you didn't know, and the sides of them that you didn't know, in good ways or bad ways or whatever. And so like I thought I knew my dad, and I did in a lot of ways, and then there are a lot of ways that I didn't. And so when I wanted to kind of go through, I kept looking to his things, to sort of tell me some story about the things that I'd missed. And so we talked about that, and then we talked about the idea of this young man whose dad had been killed in a car accident, which Daniel's dad was, sort of going back to his father's hometown and going through all of his things to try to figure out who his dad was. And in that process, getting a job at this antique mall, and so oddly enough, even though the sort of spine of that story seems dark and sad in a lot of ways, and there is some of that in the movie, it's still kind of a workplace comedy because it's surrounded by an ensemble of kind of crazy people in this town and that work in this antique mall, and I felt like we had a story for it when we realized that because to me, really good episodes of television or really good films are generally about one thing, and all of the characters kind of experiencing it in one way or another. There's a wholeness to that, and it's very satisfying in that way. And when we came upon the idea that all of these people in one way or another were sort of living in the past, and that their trajectory of all these characters would be to sort of move out of that in some way, then we felt like we had a story.
Okay, and then can you talk a little bit about your production company as well? Yeah,
absolutely. And Gary is here too. So do we want to?
Yeah, and so this is this is our last question before Q&A. So if you can just jump in if you want.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Yeah. Pull a chair up. No, so much of this in terms of the fundraising, in terms of because initially after Daniel and I wrote the script, like we were adrift for a few years trying to figure out how do we raise money for this, how do we do this, and I'd met Gary. I'd met Gary years ago, but when there's a television show that I was doing, and we thought we were going to get to shoot it here in Little Rock, and it was called Quarry, and we came here and we scouted, and the studio, the network, HBO, it was Cinemax, but HBO owned Cinemax, and so HBO wanted to shoot here and all of this, and so we made this. We were trying to work it out with the state that we could start this TV show here, which would have been great because we would have built a sound stage, we would have done all of these things. And then the incentive in Arkansas wasn't essentially funded enough in order to do a project that large. So so basically we lost that project. And Gary had been instrumental in doing all the right things to sort of convince HBO to come here. And then he was also, when it looked like we were going to lose it, and we did end up losing it, but Gary sort of kicked in gear in a way that I hadn't seen anybody do in order to still sort of salvage this project. And I immediately started talking to Daniel about like, okay, well, like, what if let's join forces with this guy and figure out how to do that. So that's where Gary came in.
And I failed miserably in salvaging, but when I still remember where I was when Graham called and asked if I would be interested in doing this, and my initial response was, I don't know how. I really didn't. I was a Chamber of Commerce guy. I knew how to raise nonprofit money, but I've never started a business. And even then, we weren't talking about business, we were just talking about a one-off, doing a production. But the more I thought about it, my wife made her living as a screenwriter in a time when spec scripts and pitches were go-go. I mean, it was back when you could sell something on a pitch and make a pretty handsome living without ever getting it produced. So she has a wealth of projects. I dipped my toe in the water to try to get to that level, but never really reached it, but had written things, again, like Graham, harkening back to Arkansas. That's what informed what I was doing. So, and we came back here to raise our kids. When they had turned 3, it was family, is what the reason we came back. So, if I learned anything through the years, it was how to open up and be receptive to gifts when they come along. Because I had steered pretty hard early in my career thinking I was on a particular path. And so the idea that we could have a series created by an Arkansan, shoot here, putting people to work every day, it was the holy grail. We caught it, we won. And then we didn't. And it was like we weren't prepared for success. And I've heard a lot of people in the film community and then even my journey in other areas talk a lot about or blame the state. If the state would get its act together, then we'd have a vibrant film community. Or blaming somebody else. Why didn't Jeff Nichols do his latest film here? Or why? And this seemed like, this is somebody taking responsibility. And it was 2 guys that one, I didn't know Dan, but I knew Graham. And I was so impressed by what he had already done and the trajectory that he was on. And all I needed was that Graham thought Daniel was something. I remember one of the first times I met Graham was through Ray McKinnon. And that made me have a different impression of Graham because Ray thought Graham was something. So it was kind of that fortuitous aligning. And I talked to my wife about it. We agreed to do it, but to not do it as a one-off. We'd seen too much transient people moving heaven and earth to make a passion project, just to do one thing. And I think this is where the economic development side came in. Is like, if we're going to do this, let's do it from the private sector. Let's grow a business that could potentially do this again and again and again, and bring others along with us, that we would hopefully inspire others and grow others to do the same thing. So long rambling tale of the fact it was just, I look down, it's the greatest blessing of my life to have said yes to him. And we wrapped Saturday night on our first. We stress that all the time, it's our first. But to have gotten this far, you were there early on. We went through the chair. We did things the right way through Innovate Arkansas, AEDC, getting the equity investment tax credit, doing all of those things to convince people that this very old industry is actually a knowledge-based industry with proprietary intellectual property that's ones and zeros, digital, that can generate revenue in perpetuity. It just happens to be a 19th century art form. But with that, we were able to convince folks that yes, this is a business, and our goal is that others who on our team will be creating their own. What expatriate, we know 1 or 2, is going to come back and do the same thing, and that we want to help that. That's why I was looking at your values. That's it. This is too small a community to be competitive or jealous or thinking if you do something it's going to take away from someone else. Give first. That's it. And if you can bring others along with you, you can really make strong bonds, then you've got it made. But thank you, Graham, for that wonderful gift.
So I do want to thank you guys so much because, literally they finished on Saturday. So, Graham, you were emailing me, he was acting that day and emailing back late at night to try to make this happen. So I'm really, really grateful to you guys for making this happen. But now that you've shot your first film, you've wrapped that, what's next for you guys?
Well, I mean, it's you know, Gary has a real job. I have a real job insofar as I have to figure out who's going to, you know, pay me to write something next and all that. But I mean, in terms of this endeavor, you know, we'll essentially start post-production tomorrow. Go into the editing room, start looking at everything that we have, and you know, Daniel will kind of make his selects in terms of all the takes and all that, and the editors are sort of making an assembly right now, and then we'll just go into the process of editing, which, you know, is usually between, you know, even though production was basically a month, you know, we'll now spend 3 to 4 months making that look and sound good, and you know, because it's like, okay, well, that was funny on the page and it was really funny on the set. Why am I watching it and it's not funny anymore? So that's what, you know, that's what you have to do, and that's what you have to do in editing, and that's the process of that. And then you know, the one of the things about this endeavor, and the reason that, you know, and I know I said this first thing, but was making a living at it and making projects here. I mean, part of that is selfish insofar as I have a wife and 2 kids here, and I live here and love this place and want to stay here, and I'm tired of, you know, being in Los Angeles or New Orleans for 6 months at a time. And part of it is also to sort of, because what you see that can sort of grow here, and how we're currently kind of exporting so much talent and people that get trained in this sort of thing. Because, like, even just with, you take the Little Rock Film Festival, and I was there the first year, and I was watching the Arkansas shorts, and it was like, okay, well, there's, you know, there's a few good films there, and then you see it the next year and they're better, and you see them the next year and they're better, and then you see them the next year and they're really good, and there's a lot more of them, and it's just like, and it's not, it's just a matter of being in an audience and saying, well, that's great, I want to try that, or, well, if they can do that, I can do that, you know, and it feeds on itself. And so that's what we're hoping for this. I think that, you know, Daniel and Gary and I will talk later this week, just in terms of like what the next project is going to be. You know, we all have, you know, things that we've done before, or ideas for something to do next, and figuring out, like, budgetarily what we can do and what we want to do, what would be the next thing in order. I mean, part of the reason that we chose Antiquities as a project to do first is because we're all very proud of it, but also, you know, 70% of it takes place in one location. There are certain, you know, there's no special effects to it. I mean, it is a large ensemble. I think that what's showing up on screen looks a lot pricier than what we spent on it, because of the community around here and how much people were willing to sort of give, or how much people were willing to help, and an exceptional crew that we frankly, and actors that we, you know, I never would have expected that we would have gotten, both in terms of crew and actors, you know, especially for the price. And so, and a lot of people, I mean, you know, Gary said this in the past, but a lot of people make a film, and then that's the goal, is to make the film. And what do we do? Like, then they make the film and they're like, well, what do we do next? And with this, we do have a little bit more of a plan for it, because you know, we got our actors, you know, most of our leads from you know, some big agencies in Los Angeles. So now those agencies are incentivized to help us with film festivals, or in getting the film in front of distributors, because they want to do right by their clients. And we were still able, the great news is, to populate the film with a lot of great Arkansas actors and regional actors and things like that. So that's great as well. But we have after editing, it will be a matter of trying to show it to various studios and see if they want to bite, and if they do, that will be the first step, and if they don't, then we'll go the festival route, and try to sell it that way. So that's that's kind of the next steps of it.
Okay, great. So we have time for a couple of questions. If you guys just want to raise your hand and ask.
So, Graham, can you dig a little deeper into what makes your writing? You talked about you want to keep it unique and not go with the trends. If I were someone that was evaluating you and how you're different, what would I say?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if
You
I
want
would
me
be.
to answer that?
Yeah, sure. you give me an answer to that, and then I'll go from there. Yeah.
I'll screw this up. But quintessentially Southern without being slovenly Southern. Smart without avoiding stereotypes. He has no qualms about jumping right in the middle of what you may think is the worst stereotype ever, and then flipping it on its head and giving you something to make you think about it in a different way. We see that about different parts of the country. I don't want to overburden him, but we see that with the Coen brothers. And it's terrifically weird and wonderful. When I read this script, it's not a jokey script. You don't read the script and laugh out loud necessarily. But once you know him, and then once you know Daniel, it puts you in this world that you see something that you didn't see before. I think those of you that have watched Quarry, you see a lot of familiarity, but then also in ways that you've never experienced it before. So I love that, especially being from here, that you think, wow, one of ours did that. So anyway, there's my
No. That's a huge compliment, and I mean, it is like my favorite filmmakers are the Coens and Billy Wilder, and part of what I love about what they do is that they do what they do well in any genre. There's no other. I mean, Billy Wilder made Sunset Boulevard. He made Double Indemnity. He made Some Like It Hot. Like, there's no. He could do anything. The Coens similarly, but there's always their take on that world, and I admire that, so much, and aspire to that. I'm not an auteur, so, but that's what I aspire to in my writing, is to be able to try those different things. And also it's why, I mean, the one huge endorsement of getting into writing, film or directing or just writing in general, is that your subject is the world. Like, you can write about anything that is fascinating you, anything that you are in awe of, that can be your next subject if you want it to be that. And so in some ways I was, probably a very unfocused child and adolescent and teenager and college student and all that, but it was part of the reason I chose what I did is because I can, and I say this often, but like I use writing as an excuse to research. Like, I can study the world or some segment of the world or something I'm fascinated by, and I'm not in one job. I can move on to the next world after that. So that's one of the things that I enjoy the most about doing this.
taking that to a major company, say like Lionsgate,
Mhm.
what's the expectation if you got to the executives and they actually have your script?
I mean, it's always sort of I mean, anytime you're able to get it that far, you know, congratulations, because it's always a very difficult thing, you know, and there's no, you know, a lot of people say, well, should I get an agent or should I do whatever? And it's like, there's no getting an agent. Like, agents are like sharks. They're not present. They're nowhere to be found. They don't exist. And then there's blood in the water and they appear. Like, if you get off the plane in Los Angeles and you drop a nickel, it will roll to Creative Artist Agency or to William Morris or to, like, there is, like, as soon as you're making $1, you'll get 3 calls from agents, and you're like, you didn't even know that I existed a month ago. And that just seems to be the way that system works. I mean, in terms of getting it in front of a studio, some of it is the thing I was talking about in terms of writing towards trends, and why that's kind of the path to madness, I think, is because it takes a long time to write something and write it well, you know, and maybe that means every day for 6 months, or maybe that means at night for 3 years or whatever. But like, if you're chasing a trend, and the way the system seems to work is, and a lot of this is coming down to the fact that I'm going to say it requires a lot of good luck, because, like, for instance, if The Hangover came out on Friday night, and you decide on Monday morning, wow, that was a huge success, and that's the type of comedy that I'm going to sit down and write, because people are going to want to do that. Like, you're too late. Like, on Monday, those studios are buying the scripts that are already on their desk or that they know about that are like The Hangover. Like, that is why you should always write what you're passionate about and what you want to do, because there's no way of knowing if, I mean, my agent I wrote a new half hour, and my agent sent it out on to 7 cable networks on Friday, at the end of the day on Friday. I have they could call me today and say, you have 7 meetings, they all want to meet with you. Or they could call and say, well, you know, Amazon has something like it in the pipeline, so they don't want to do it. You know, somebody else, you know, Netflix has something that they're working on that's set in higher education, so they're not going to do it. You know, you just can't predict that sort of thing. It almost takes, like, just having written something that, like, catches a wave. And, you know, and a lot of people I mean, what my agents say is that they're looking for every excuse to say no to you. So, like, if it's something, I mean, the first television show that I sold was this show that was set in the world of college football, and we went around and we took it to like 8 different cable networks, and 7 of them said it's too much like Friday Night Lights. And it's like, this is nothing like like, there's not even football in this show. This is all behind the scenes, and it's college, and it's about, you know, billionaire boosters and millionaire coaches going into poverty level, you know, shacks and begging these kids to come save their jobs. Like, this is a show about class in the South. Like, and while Friday Night Lights touched on that, like, it was a very good show, but it was a kitchen sink drama, you know, and it was more of a soap opera in all the best possible ways. But they were looking for, like, well, what they were really thinking is, I'm worried about putting a football show on the air, because Friday Night Lights had a tortured path, you know, and so I don't know if it'll be successful or not, and I was born and raised in New York or in California, and I don't understand the middle of the country and how much, you know, people will want to watch this sort of thing. So that's the real answer. But their verbal answer was, it's too much like Friday Night Lights. So anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying, like, that is what keeps you up at night as a writer, is because you could have had, you know, a show that's playing all over, a movie that's playing all over the country, or a show that goes for 5 years, or not, based on kind of whimsy. So.
Okay, well, we're just after 7, so we're gonna go ahead and just wrap it up, and you guys can ask the questions after. But I do have a question for both of you. You know, clearly you guys totally understand grind and making something happen when it seems like kind of the odds are against you, and that's sort of what this is about, is teaching people, you know, what you've learned. And so if you could give people, both of you, one piece of advice to take away from the night, what would it be?
Be your own champion. I cannot tell you how many people want to skip steps. If you'll just get this script to Billy Bob Thornton, if you just let Harry Thomas, now if you can just get Graham, not this script, not this idea, but this little germ of something, he'll write it and take care of it and make us all a bunch of money. It's true of anything else. You are your best champion. You honor that, because that's as unique as anything in the world. And persistence. Just stay after it. And don't skip steps. Do all those fundamental things it takes to get to that point. Had we not done that, we would have become victims like everybody else of trying to, you know, wave family and friends and credit cards and all that, trying to make a movie. But we ended up with 100% Arkansas or Arkansas expatriate investors. And now our goal is to make them $1. So they'll want to do it again. But treat people right along the way, and it just persistence.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I would just say that I think that to the degree that you know what you want and what you aspire to be, like, because I got to that point in my path where I was like, I don't know if I want to be an actor bad enough to do that. But I did say to myself, now writing is something that I could spend the next 40 years of my life doing, and it would be challenging enough, like, and it's true, like, I've been doing it for, you know, I wrote my first play 20 years ago, and I think that in the last few years, I'm just getting good at it. And sometimes not good at it, but, you know, but I think that the main thing is, like, if you are like the type of person that's like, I want to be a director, then go make films. If you want to be a writer, write screenplays, and make that declaration in a way of that, because that's the thing that you're going to be successful at. If you go the route of saying, okay, well, I'll be a PA, and then I'll work my way up to being a key PA, and then I'll work my way up to being an AD, and then the thing is if you're very effective at that, like, you're going to be, and there are ADs that are exceptional, like assistant directors that are exceptional at what they do, and they were just crafted by the gods in order to be exceptional at that, and that's what they should do. In the same way of, like, production designers or hair and makeup or all these people that are involved in these crew positions. But, like, if the thing that you want to be as a director, then say, I'm a director and I'm going to go make a movie. Or if the thing you want to be is to, and you can learn from each of those departments and each of those steps, but the thing that you have to pursue in all of your spare time is that goal, what you're striving for most. because if you want to be a director and you're good at being an AD, then people are going to keep hiring you to be an assistant director, or people are going to keep hiring you to be this other thing. Like, figure out what that is, and once you do that, like, there's no amount of discouragement that I could give you to tell you not to get into this industry, because you're not going to listen. Like, if you're meant to do this, then you're not going to listen to anything I have to say that's saying, don't go to LA, don't do it, it's a horrible, you know. Like, so like, once you figure that out, like, you're golden, you're good.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us
Yeah.
too. That was great. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And thanks again to our sponsors. And thank you guys for coming. If you have